and we encourage your questions and comments. Now, without further ado, here's your host, L.Nathan Hare.
All right, here we go. Living now, living right now. This is L.Nathan Hare, your host here for this next hour at WFO Power 96.5 FM on your radio dial. Our principal sponsor, of course, the Community Action Organization of Western New York, still fighting the war on poverty, now in our 53rd year. I want to welcome all of you again to this hour of insight, introspection, and interpretation of facts, events, and trends affecting you right here and right now in Buffalo and the Western New York community, and in fact, connecting you to communities all across the country. Each week, we focus on things we think will be of interest to you, which will serve to motivate you and serve to connect you to the broader issues that affect our communities here in Western New York. Now, today's program is live, so you can call it, you can join our discussion. I hope that you will. Our number here again is 837-1112. That's 837-1112. I'm also here with Emmanuel Radford, who is the producer of the live streaming of our program. If you want to participate in the program, you can use your computer, your PC, or your handheld device, type in Facebook, and then type in Living Now, and our program will come up. You'll actually see us talking on the air. And you can type in your questions, your observations, or your concerns, and we'll respond to them as much as we can right here on the air. I want to take today's program, at least the beginning part of the program, and I really want to say something positive about some local leadership in our community that stood up on behalf of youth. Hats off to Dr. Will Koretzes, who is the director of the Office of Intergovernmental Affairs for the Buffalo Public School District, and April Baskin, who is the chairperson of the Erie County Legislature. They stepped in when they found that an 8-year-old child was being transported from the county youth detention facility in the county family to the county family court building in leg shackles. Emmanuel, don't look at me like that. I'm not making this up. Emmanuel's looking at me like he can't believe this occurred. 8 years old, this child was being transported from the detention facility on ferry to the family court building downtown in leg shackles. I know that's hard to process, right? Now, I don't know what was going on. I mean, the child could have been off the hook. I have no idea. But transporting young children this way is said to have been a long-standing practice in Erie County. Now, I'm not sure if that statement is actually true, if that has always been what we have done in Erie County. However, absent a clear demonstration of that a particular child is completely out of control, treating such children as if they are already convicted or that they are hardened criminals cannot possibly be a rational or appropriate form of care. Even if we've always done it, it would seem to me that this is something that we should stop doing. Not many of us have been involved in the juvenile justice system as employees of the system or as the children and families being processed by the system. If you had, you would know that it is common. It is a common but a difficult to process sight to see children being held in leg shackles or more as they are being transported from the youth detention facility to the family court downtown. But more than likely, if you saw that, it would be children who were a little older, who were like 14, 15, 16 years old. But for a child 8 years old to be shackled, that seems way over the top. But led by the detention center staff, you might see children, as I said, usually in that 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old range. You might see them made to shuffle through a waiting room filled with people with the clanking of metal chains. Just try to wrap your mind around that. You're a 13 or 14-year-old child. Now think of yourself as an 8-year-old child and being in that circumstance. It is likely because there have been experiences with some children who were completely out of control that these procedures were adopted, procedures have been adopted that have been applied to all children in transport. That may be how this occurred, rather than making discretionary decisions about I'll shackle this one and not shackle that one. They just said, well, let's just shackle all of them, right? According to an article in the Brooklyn Law Review, it's at least at least 28 states in the United States not only shackle kids, they require that you shackle kids in transport from their detention facilities to their family court facilities. These 28 states don't even leave it up to you to decide whether or not you want to do it. They actually require that you do it. The Supreme Court of this country has explicitly, before the Supreme Court that we apparently now have under this new administration, but the older Supreme Courts, the ones that were about the rights of the citizens of the United States, the Supreme Court has explicitly stated that blanket policies that require all criminal defendants to appear in court while shackled are impermissible. So for adults, you can't have a blanket policy that all adults being taken from a holding center or wherever to the court that they're going to be litigated at. You could not just automatically put those people in shackles. That's for adults. But the court is silent on the same privilege for children. So apparently the rules that apply for adults that say that it's too prejudicial to have an adult come into court in leg shackles and in handcuffs, that would sort of give an impression to a jury, this guy must be an animal or something, must be a horrible person. So they provide that protection for the adults unless you really are an out-of-control person. But if you're a juvenile, they don't provide that protection for you. So you could do that to juveniles as a matter of policy, and 28 states required that you do this, right? So, maybe I want to restate that. So the Supreme Court has been silent on the applicability of this rule to juvenile court proceedings. Silent, perhaps, because the courts did not see a need to set policy on something that seemed so obvious. But what may seem obvious to most is not obvious to all. The juvenile justice system was premised on the notion that juveniles need treatment and rehabilitation and that they should not be treated punitively like adults. But in these 28 states that I mentioned that were referred to in the Brooklyn Law Review article, it seems to have become lost that the judicial system is an opportunity to educate children about justice and equality, showing them that we as adults value these children's humanity and that the behavior that they may have been accused of evidences that these youth haven't valued others' humanity. So by showing these young people that even though they're being accused of something that they have done that was harming other people's humanity, we respect their humanity, and we're trying to teach that respect to them in the way that we deal with them, even as they go through a process of adjudication and possibly punishment. The routine use of shackles reinforces the notion that our justice system is unfair and inequitable. Further, it teaches children that the very opposite of what we want, that the children, that they are not valued and that they are not respected. Came across an article in the Christian Science Monitor written by a Stacy teacher, Cataroo, and it refers to a case where a young girl describes her experience being shackled before court in this way. She says, "What I still think about today is being in public view, weighed down by loud metal shackles, and the humiliation and shame that I felt. All eyes in the court looked at me as if I were some crazed criminal or an animal. The dehumanizing experience shaped not only how others saw me, but also how I saw myself for many years. It made me think of myself as a criminal." So it's difficult to quantify, but according to David Shapiro, who's the manager of the campaign against indiscriminate juvenile shackling for the National Juvenile Defender Center in Washington, he estimates that roughly 100,000 youth a year in this country are shackled in this way. Now, I got to speak from the law enforcement person's perspective. From law enforcement also has a view. From their perspective, at least for those referred to in the articles that I have looked at preparing for this program, those officers who oversee security at juvenile courts push back. They say the practice is necessary for safety and the prevention of escapes. In Jefferson County, for example, in Kentucky, juveniles being brought from detention into the courtroom are routinely handcuffed in transit and during their hearing with their hands in front so that they can handle documents. Now, in Kentucky, they say we do that with all prisoners. If you are handcuffing them properly, which we train our people to do, it doesn't hurt them. It protects them, as well as the people who are guarding them and others. Now, that protects the people who are guarding them and others, I think is the root of why you see this as policy in these juvenile cases. Because you had one youth, out of control, bit somebody, kicked somebody. And so to protect the custodial officers who are transporting these kids or who are carrying these kids into court, they shackle these kids, some both legs and hand shackle, right? They do that to protect the officers, not to protect the children, right? I mean, that to me seems really at the root of all of this. Reform proponents say that there are better ways to ensure safety. The potential harm associated with shackling far outweighs safety concerns in the vast majority of cases. And in the rare cases where restraints might be necessary, the decision to use them should be made by the judge adjudicating the case. It shouldn't be left to, I'm not trying to disrespect the custodial officers, the detention youth workers and so on, but it seems that when you have to go that far to actually shackle an 8-year-old child, if that's something you felt you had to do because of the child's behavior, you should bring that behavior before somebody above you, and that somebody else who would look at this from a clinical and a judicial, perspective would make that decision for you, so that you are not making a cavalier, automatic, I just treat children this way kind of a decision. In fact, this case with the 8-year-old in Erie County is the first one that I came across for a child that young. I had heard of a case in another county in another state of a 9-year-old being shackled like this. This is the first time I heard this of somebody 8 years old, although 8 and 9-year-olds seem like the same age as far as I'm concerned. Right? But I was just taking what I was talking about from a report in the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges by Sean Marsh. The council based in Reno, Nevada is the latest of more than half a dozen professional associations to offer policy statements supporting reform. The posture of automatically shackling every juvenile brought before family court feeds into the us versus them mentality that we see amongst the police, amongst the law enforcement personnel, customs and border enforcement personnel, this idea of an us and a them. And there's always a ethnic or racial context to it, because the majority of people who seem to be treated this way tend to be black or brown people, and the vast majority of the people who are treating people this way tend to be Caucasian people. And so it takes on that kind of a character as well. The attention to shackling figures into several ongoing national conversations. One is about how to create a better relationship between law enforcement and the community, and the other centers on adolescents and the best way to get them back on a path to success if they strayed into harmful or, in some cases, unproductive or self-destructive behavior. So as that research is evolving, you have to ask yourself better questions than I think that we've asked ourselves. The question isn't just how do we control the situation when we're transporting a kid who's been accused. Keep in mind, these are not just kids accused of crimes. That's what a juvenile delinquent is. Somebody's being accused of a crime. But a person who's a PINS, a person in need of supervision, that person has not been convicted, has not even been accused of a crime. That person is basically being accused of being an annoying human being who is getting on my nerves, getting on his parents' nerves, getting on the school's nerves, won't go to school, won't obey at home, all annoying kinds of behaviors, but not crime. It's not robbing a bank, okay? Whether you're a non-secure detention person or a secure detention, child, you're still being brought to family court in these states that do this in leg shackles, and often in both leg shackles and handcuffs. So it just seems to me that from a relationship with the community, if you're the family of the child and you come to family court and you see your child being brought into family court with a jumpsuit on and their arms are, their wrists are shackled and their legs are shackled and they're shuffling into the court and everybody's looking at them like, good gracious, what have you done? What kind of person must you be, right? If you're the family of those children, how are you feeling about that? What kind of romance do you think is going to exist between that family and family court? So it creates this very intense, a posture between the court and the family about what they're seeing happening with their child, so that whatever processes take place in family court, it's colored by the fact that you clearly think of my child as some kind of an animal. My child is somebody that needs to be caged, right? And so that's one part of the discussion. The other part of it is, how do you use the fact that you now have a child in custody because of the child's behavior, whether it's non-criminal behavior but annoying behavior, or whether it's criminal behavior. The child is now in the custody of you as the county. How do you use that as an opportunity for you to try to turn that child's life around so that that child becomes a better human being? It seems to me that needlessly shackling children is going in the opposite direction of transforming that child or influencing that child's life so that that child becomes further along the path of becoming a better human being. Research has shown that many youth caught up in the juvenile justice system are facing such struggles as drug abuse, sex abuse, something that we don't talk about very much, Emmanuel, because it's hard. It's hard for us to talk about it because how often have you ever seen incest in a household? You just don't see it. I mean, you know what occurs because everybody tells you it occurs, but how many of us actually see it? So there's not much public policy that we seem to have about how we address the fact that there are so many children who end up as a percentage of those kids that are in detention care. And I know, as the Commissioner of Youth Services from 95 to 2000, that probably 40% of the kids that I had in detention custody had been sexually abused by somebody, usually somebody that they were related to. An uncle, a brother, sometimes a father, and so on. So, these kids have that kind of experience, kids that have drug abuse experience, kids that have mental health challenges, and so on. An estimated 70 to 90% of the children that come before family court have experienced some form of trauma before their court involvement. So I know that we don't like to call people victims if the person that we're talking about is the one who did something terrible to somebody else. So I don't want to put it in the context of being a victim. I'm putting it in the context that you have somebody who has been damaged in very significant ways by things that have gone on in that person's life. And your choices are, do you find a way to repair the damage, or do you increase the damage that has been done to this person by making it worse rather than making it better? That's basically the way that I'm trying to frame this. Reformers have been going after a host of many of these juvenile justice practices that stem from a tough on crime in the 1980s and 1990s era, when youth were feared to be turning into super predators, a prediction that never materialized. I don't know if you are old enough to remember this, right? But this is, Ronald Reagan, and I know your first black president that you all talk about with the saxophone, Bill Clinton, the greatest, bestest president we ever heard and whatnot. Well, he and his wife referred to these children as super predators, and built. It's bad enough that you felt like that, but then you built policy around this idea of these people being super predators. I think what I'm going to do before I move into my next point is take our first break, and then we'll get back into our subjects. If you all stick with us, we will sit inside of the break here at Living Right Now.
Do you want to increase your home's value? Do you want to lower your energy bills? Are you in need of affordable financing for your next home improvement project? The CAO Home Improvement Resource Program can help. Just come to their monthly HIRP orientation session every second Wednesday of the month at 564 Dodge Street, Building 400. HIRP staff will help identify the resources you need to get financed, and they'll even help you with completing your application. You won't know what you qualify for until you call them today at 881-6543. That's 881-6543. Learn
Mrs. Doyle on one.
Programs you may be eligible for, and ask about the affordable financing program that can help turn your house into your dream home. Call 881-6543 for more info. It's the Home Improvement Resource Program, restoring value to neighborhoods across Erie County, one house at a time. Brought to you by the Community Action Organization of Erie County.
6.5 FM on your dial. This is L.Nathan Hare, your host, here with Emmanuel Radford, who's doing the live streaming of the program. I think Mother Doyle is on the phone. Let me grab her real quick. Hi, Mother Doyle. How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good, Mr. Hare.
Yep.
I want to make two quick comments, and then I have an announcement.
Sure.
Regarding children who have been sexually abused. When you think about what's been going on, and I know this is a real national problem in the Catholic Church, and the recent announcement that over 1,000 children have been sexually abused. I mean, that is just it's just inconceivable almost to think that that's been, and it's still probably going on, not just locally, but I meant to say not just nationally, but I'm sure that something's happening locally. And then when you think about the children who have been taken away from their parents with this whole immigration issue, and there are still over 750 children who still have not been returned to their parents, and who knows what's going on behind those locked doors. Because there are sexual predators everywhere.
Yep.
And I know that has to have a profound impact on children and the things that they go through. And I don't think it's being addressed enough. I just wanted to, those things came to mind.
Right. And Mother Doyle, I think it's important on what you're saying that people understand that the things that you do that are traumatic to a child are much more profound in terms of their effect than things that you do to an adult. Because a child's only been on the planet for 8, 9, 10, 12, 13 years. So when you do something, or a child experiencing something very traumatic, that becomes like the dominant thing that's in that child's mind all the time. They're always thinking about it.
Yes.
Whereas if you're 30 years old and something happens, well, you've got 30 years of life experience. You've learned how to filter things and so on.
Yeah, I think it's very sad. That's what's going on. But I just wanted to announce that I'm doing a special tribute to Aretha Franklin.
Oh, great!
On Saturday, September the 8th. I wanted to get an earlier date, but there's so much going on. The library didn't have. That was the first date I could get. So that's going to be at the Meriwether Library in the auditorium, Saturday, September the 8th. I'll have flyers Wednesday. I'm working on the flyers now.
Mm-hmm.
And I will be sending out flyers, and I'll make sure that you get some flyers as well, Mr. Hare.
Yep, and I will. You don't even have to digitally send it to me. I'll just scan it up, and we'll send it out in our All Points bulletins as well.
Well, that'll be good. It'll be from 2 to 5 p.m. I wanted to have more time so that people, they don't have to come and stay the whole time. They can come at a certain time that's convenient for them. But it's going to be a collage. It's going to be a celebration. There will be poetry and music and excerpts from some of her films and a little bit from the Blues Brothers in that scene when she did that particular scene. And I have a couple area singers who are going to sing some of her popular songs.
Oh,
so
that'd be perfect.
It's going to be a real great affair. And I'm going to top it off, Mr. Hare, by wearing my Aretha hat. I will have that on. So I'm hoping people will come out. There's no charge, and we want to celebrate the legacy of the Queen of Soul.
All right.
So I hope people come out. Thank you so much, Mr. Hare.
Thank
Hang
you,
up
Mother
and listen
Joe.
to the rest of your show.
Appreciate you. Thank you so much. And so while we were off the air, one of our listeners, Emmanuel, why don't you say what?
She made a comment. She said, family court is not there to help Family court is not there for help or solutions that give them life skills.
And so I didn't know exactly which way perspective that the listener was calling from, but think about it from this perspective. We tend to think of family court as the place you go when people are getting divorced, where you're trying to settle up family property. What are some of the things you go to? A child support, and we think of those kinds of issues. But if the court is charged with the responsibility for adjudicating issues that happen with young people, it then also has to be responsible for those young people whose issues you are now adjudicating. You can't just come in like a lightning strike and say, you're guilty, this punishment happens to you, or you're not guilty and flick you back out into the street. You as the court have to have some responsibility. So if our courts don't have a role or a current set of responsibilities in terms of trying to fix or weigh in on fixing the problems with youth, then that has to be placed on the courts. Courts do something called
Kamala 1.
Persons in need of supervision, or PINS children, and those children have not been accused of a crime. It's the court's responsibility to put together a court-ordered plan of care and intervention for that child. So there has to be some responsibility that the court bears on what happens and how we take care of those children that are brought before it. I think we have a caller on the end. Let me grab that call real quick. Hi, caller, are you there?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Hey,
as always,
caller.
a good program.
Yes, sir.
I just want to make a couple of points. One, in terms of the priest-pedophile situation. It's really strange when you have a church that has a priesthood that claims celibacy, that they would then be brought into a situation where there is child molestation. What happened to that whole celibacy thing? But in terms of the idea of people fearing us, I think there may be some of that in play, but I think the situation that's going on now is that they've created a situation where all someone has to say is, I was afraid, I feared for my life. I know you're talking about the judges and the court system, but also in terms of arrest and police, that all they had to do is say, I was afraid, and somehow that's justifiable. So I think a lot of it is a justification for an animus that they have already, a hatred that they have already, and maybe even a hunting spirit that they have already, where they just want to go hurt, maim, or kill somebody. And they have that as their license to kill, that, I was afraid. I don't think that fear is always the reality. I think it's sometimes very much an excuse.
I absolutely agree with that. I don't think if people were afraid of you, they would avoid you. They would try to stay away from you, right? I mean, the fact that somebody would actually put themselves in a position where they would be in your physical presence and potentially could be hurt by you, they would willfully do that suggests to me that they're not afraid of you at all. And so the kinds of things that we see going on really are a reflection of people's sense that they have power and their sense that they have a right to use that power to marginalize the rights and lives and fortunes of other people, particular other people.
The last thing I want to say, brother, is I'd like to start a campaign that we should have random drug testing for police officers and incident demanding drug testing for police officers. If an officer is involved in a situation where there is deadly force used, just like if they were in an accident, if a bus driver is in an accident, he immediately has to take a drug test.
Mm-hmm.
That same kind of immediate drug testing protocol should be instituted for police officers, because they'll tell you what the victim was using or what he was doing, but they don't tell you what the officers are hyped up on. So I think we should start a campaign for random and mandatory drug testing, incident-related mandatory drug testing for officers.
That's
I'll hang up and listen to the rest of the show, my brother.
All right, thanks. That's a great suggestion that we should try to get into our city conversation. So we'll definitely do that. We have a caller? Okay. And so, having said all of what I've said, I want to give credit where credit is due. And that's the case with Dr. Will Koretzes, who is the City School District's Office of Intergovernmental Affairs Director, and April Baskin, who is the chairperson of the Erie County Legislature. My understanding is that Dr. Koretzes, when he heard about this 8-year-old child in leg shackles, he went to investigate, and it took him forever. I mean, you got a lot of pushback and a lot of obstinacy and can't tell you about it, we can't discuss it with you, that kind of response from people in the system. But he persisted. This is why I'm appreciative, because he persisted. And after a number of attempts and, whatever he did to get somebody to finally give him an actual answer to the questions he was asking, he got clarity about what the policy actually is and got some consensus that there are better ways that we could do this and some changes in policy. Then he was able to get the ear of the chairperson of the county legislature, which is not always easy for somebody to do. But April Baskin clearly is a willing ear to hear what people who are her constituents are talking about, what they're concerned about. She was responsive to what Dr. Koretzes brought to her. She got into it. As a result, we see a change that's actually taking place. And this is the change that has occurred. The policy now says that no child under the age of 13 will be routinely leg shackled in the family court building, and that each child under age 13 being transported will be accompanied by 2 adult youth detention workers. So that is now a policy that has been enacted by the county legislature that now drives how that situation is handled in our youth detention and family court facilities as a result of the strident advocacy of Dr. Koretzes and April Baskin. So much love and heartfelt thanks to them for their efforts. Now, as we're talking about youth, and Mother Dore was talking about this just a bit ago, what if you found out that some juvenile police officers or truant officers or other custodial forces had arrested 5,000 children in your community and took them somewhere else without even telling you where they took the kids? And what if after months of lawsuits and haranguing, 4,500 of the children were brought back and given to their parents or guardians in the community, but more than 500 of the children weren't brought back? And not only were they not brought back, the people who took the kids said, we don't know where they went. We took them. We know we took them. And we know we gave them to that person over there, some, family court or someplace, some foster care agency somewhere. And these kids were dispersed to places, but, maybe to a privately operated juvenile detention facility, maybe a privately operated juvenile group home, maybe to a foster home, maybe to some people that just, said, I'll take care of them, send them to me, and so on, right? But you have no idea where the kids are, and the people who took them don't have any idea where the kids are. How would you react to that? If that happened here in Buffalo, if that happened to you, how would you react to that? Even if it didn't happen to you personally, how would you react as a member of the community of the residents of the city of Buffalo if that happened to people in the city of Buffalo, whether it happened to your individual family or not? How would you react to that? For all intents and purposes, more than 500 children have been kidnapped by agents of the United States and being denied even the possibility of being returned to their parents. People in this country have generally focused on the policies of this country's president reacting to this issue, but I think we must also ask ourselves, who are these people? Who are these people who work for the U.S. Customs and Border Control, or the Office of Immigration and Customs Enforcement? Who are they? Because they're the ones that are doing it. Now, they arrested, or they wanted to indict all of those people, in Germany, who were soldiers who were executing whatever the Nazi, rulers of Germany wanted done. These soldiers executed this stuff. The Americans wanted those people to be arrested and taken to Nuremberg and tried and told that you can't just obey a completely immoral order. Well, isn't this immoral what was being done with these kids? Okay, just a thought. We got a caller. Hang on. Let me grab that call real quick. Hi, caller. Are you there?
Hi, I am.
Hello. How are you doing?
I'm well. I think that we, in no disrespect to Mother Doyle, but I think we shouldn't be worried about other cultures and their children. That's been our mistake in the civil rights movement. We need to worry about what's going on directly in our community and stay focused on our children. They have plans for everyone, whether they're explicit or implicit. They have plans for everyone. So we should stop taking on everyone else's fight, because no one gives recognition for the fight in civil rights that we have done. Asians and other minorities consider themselves model minorities, while they, again, turn and attack us, meaning those women who were beaten in the beauty salons, the children, and the mother and the children who were beaten in the hair shops, and the pact that Arabs and Asians have not to give black hair or sell black products to black women so that they can own their own hair shop. So we need to redefine where we're reaching for our children. But there should be some sort of, and I don't want to use a term, counseling organization that these mothers can turn to when their children are having issues, where their children can receive proper services. And even if the mothers are horrible or parents are horrible and their kids are in the youth detention centers, those parents still need some type of advocate to help them and their parenting skills, but also know their rights and the rights of their children, who are primarily African American, in terms of how they're treated, how they're transported, and then the next steps into getting them out of those programs. So I think more of the focus should be on us in terms of remediation, in terms of parenting, job skills, and a better outreach, because there's a lot of programs, but you have people who aren't taking part in those programs because our outreach needs to be more in-depth and on a serious level.
I kind of like where you're coming from on that, because I think in other communities, other so-called minority or ethnic centric communities, they have their sort of own child and family service kind of organizations that help them to respond to issues that occur within their communities. So you see Jewish organizations, you see Asian organizations, you see Hispanic organizations, and so on, that are basically organs in those communities that are centered on them. They tend not to be funded by the government, though. They tend to be funded by volunteer contributions from people in their communities. And we used to do that in our communities. When
I agree, but we have to, and please forgive me for interrupting, but we have to stop running to try to include everybody else.
No, I agree. That's
what about? Because they don't care. They don't give honor to the people who died in the civil rights movement. Because what we did, they can take advantage of all these diversity.
Right.
It really should be for black people, not diversity.
Right. That's my point. So when I talk about those organizations, they're ethnic centric. In other words, they work on their own issues. They don't work on everybody's issues. They work on their issues. And so I agree with you. We should be doing the same kind of thing. We used to do that when we came out of the period of enslavement. We had mutual aid societies that formed all over the country that took care of all kinds of needs. They were the foster care system. They were the people that handled family counseling. They built houses. They helped people get loans and so on. That were basically African or African church-based mutual aid societies or associations. And for some reason, we lost that structure as we fought so hard to integrate with everybody else. We wound up, sort of integrating away what we were as in terms of having, African-centered organizations. I think you're right that we have to find ways to build that back up again.
Well, I think if we have these churches stop taking government money so they can actually get into the community and not worry about money being taken away from them, they can really speak up and be a motivating factor and not worry about if I'm going to lose my government funding.
Well, just like we put money in churches on, Sundays and Wednesdays and whatever days, our churches gathered and whatnot, we do that for that purpose. We should also be putting money up from our own community to finance organizations that help us to look out for one another. That's something that we're going to have to do.
I think people should stop putting money in church, and that's different from tithing. Tithing is different. Tithing has something to do totally, you can tithe with your time and your efforts. It's not just monetary. But there was a fight in a church in Detroit when the pastor asked for a $1,000 tithe. But I think people should stop tithing until churches invest in our communities, build schools for our children, build homes for homeless, and start looking at the infrastructure rather for the entire community and the communities that surround them.
Right, or the churches
starting with our children.
Right, or the churches themselves should allocate a portion of their tithes to those very things that you just described, so that if you're going to tithe, some of that tithing ought to get reflected in stuff that's being done for the people in the community to help people solve problems, helping people to access resources to enable them to set their lives up and to go forward as a part of a intact community. I appreciate your call.
I think if you push for people to stop tithing until things change, and you should do it, they'll start making a difference. You should start that.
Okay, I'm going to write that one down. Okay.
Listen, no change, no tithing. You get it? No tithing, until change. No change, no tithing. You should really push that initiative. It will there's millions upon millions upon millions of dollars in our churches. And I think they would get up off of it and make a change and help slow gentrification and give stability to a lot of people if they knew, oh my God, I'm not going to get money.
All right, I hear you. I don't know that I'm going to be the one to be the champion for doing that.
You can do it
in our context here. All right, I look to talk to you again.
If not you, who? You can do it.
All right. I'll talk to you again next week. Thank you so much. All right, let's take our last break, and then we'll finish up our subject. You all stick with us. We will see you on the inside of the break here at Living Right Now.
Do you want to increase your home's value? Do you want to lower your energy bills?
Mr. Hare.
Affordable financing for your next home improvement project?
Mr. Hare. They don't tithe the NFL.
One 6543. Learn about all the home improvement programs you may be eligible for and ask about the affordable financing program that can help turn your house into your dream home. Call 881-6543 for more info. It's the Home Improvement Resource Program, restoring value to neighborhoods across Erie County, one house at a time. brought to you by the Community Action Organization of Erie County.
All right, welcome back to Living Now here at WFO Power 96.5 FM on your dial. I'm here with Emmanuel Radford, who's doing the live streaming of the program. The number here again is 837-1112. That's 837-1112. And, you know, I got to let that last comment kind of work around in me and whatnot. But, you know, I don't know that it would be the best posture to sort of advocate for people not tithing until, you know, we got what we wanted. But I think it is a doable thing for us to be campaigning with our churches that 10% or whatever of a church's tithes go into a pool of resources that we use to set things up in our communities that we know that we need. So you're not going to stop the county or the state from prosecuting a child who has done something wrong. But you can erect community-based organizations who are able to provide social work and casework that can provide counseling and other kinds of intervention for the family and the children who are affected, where instead of them being sent to an organization that does not come from the African community, they could be sent to an organization that is of the African community, and then that organization would be responsible for trying to help that child and that family to erect themselves so that they're on a more positive path as a family. I think that is a doable thing. It's something that we should be talking about. So I'm not going to like make the whole program be about that, you know, for the next whatever. But I do think that's something I'm going to start talking to people that we work with about and see if we can get some discussion about that. As I was talking before about the this whole thing that happened with these kids being taken away at the border, recently a case emerged where a husband was taking his wife to the hospital. Emmanuel, you're not going to believe this one. He's taking his wife to the hospital because she's having the birth pains, you know, whatever they call it, you know, when, you know, your body's telling you it's time to go, right? Contractions, right? And so on his way to the hospital, he's almost out of gas. He stops at a gas station to get some gas. While he's pumping the gas, two police cars with a couple of officers in each cars pull up in the front of him and in the back of him and block him being able to leave the gas station. And then two cars from the Customs Enforcement office showed up. They arrest the dude, not making this up, they arrest the dude, and then they take him away. They said that he was an illegal immigrant. Apparently he was, but he had no criminal record of any kind. And he's married to the woman that's in the car with him. She ultimately had to drive to the hospital on her own to deliver her baby. This happened in this past week. That's what's going on under the policies of this current administration. So when I talk about, you know, who are these people that are executing these policies, it seems to me that at some point you got to start looking at the people that are executing the policies. And you got to say, well, at what point do you say, as a customs enforcement person or as a police officer, that what you're asking me to do is patently wrong? I'm not doing that. I refuse to do that. That's just wrong, right? But that's not the case. It seems like there's a lot more people that work for the police and the Customs Enforcement's office that do this, that will support this kind of thing, than there are people who would resist this kind of a thing. I think we have a caller. Hang on, let me get that call real quick. Hi, caller, are you there?
Good morning, Nathan. How are you?
I'm fine, Bob. How you doing?
Very good. Listen, I just wanted to make mention of a couple of things. I've talked with my politicians over the year over the aggressiveness of child protection services, and what I am told from time to time is what is Caesar's, render unto Caesar, not my quote, what comes from the politicians to me. And you're right. Family court can get very aggressive over some of these issues. And I'm going to say this. I've got cats, and the cats will drag things home like mice because I've got a railroad spur at the end of my street. And I'll have somebody come to my house and say, there's a dead mouse there, okay? And that's held against you because a cat will drag over a mouse and you don't happen to see it, but that's some of the things that they're looking for, even though you have a railroad line at the end of the block. So I don't quite know what the solution is all the way around, but I will say this. I do have grandchildren I haven't seen since birth. I have a daughter that's still battling over custody because her boyfriend had post-traumatic stress, and because she got beat up in front of her child, she wasn't entitled to have her own kid. I'm not going to talk about the fact that I had been poisoned by an instrument that my government allowed into all of our homes. But you know what? When you see some of the strange stuff that's going on, understand where it's coming from. And I'm not very happy with my government for the most part. So God bless you, Nathan. Thank you for allowing me to express my views. And have a very nice week.
All right, Bob, you be strong. Talk to you again. And so just coming back to this issue of the mindset of the people that create these policies and enforce these policies. I don't know how many people realize that a lot of the issues that we have seen with these numbers of people that are being captured as they cross the border illegally, the illegal crossings are created by the policies of the President of the United States. What they did is they closed about 34 of the crossing points, the ports of entry, because Mexico and the United States have like a 1,500-mile border. So there's lots of places where you could cross over legally. They're what they call ports of entry. But if you close a bunch of the ports of entry, then a place where you thought you could go and say hello to the customs office and take your chance as to whether or not you'd be accepted for asylum in the United States, what happens if that office is closed? Then what do? You don't know another place to go, so people tend to just cross over someplace else that there's nobody watching, and they cross illegally. These people that we're talking about, for the most part, crossed over illegally because either the place they were trying to cross was closed, or for some other reason they were not able to go through the regular port of entry, but they brought themselves to a legal port of entry. They came, in other words, they crossed onto the American side of the border, and from there they came to a port of entry from Mexico and said, "Hi, I just crossed over illegally. I'm applying for asylum, with my kids," and they got arrested for turning themselves in. Right? They got arrested, and then their children were taken from them. They were sent to one detention facility. Their children were sent to another detention facility. In almost 400 of the cases, the parents were deported, sent back to the country that they came from without the children, even though they knew that the parents had children when they came across the border in the first place. These are policies, these are behaviors that are being executed. It may be the president who said, do this, but you're the ones who are executing it, right? I mean, at some point, there has to be some responsibility on you as the person who works in that system. And so the children who were relocated to foster care and group juvenile detention facilities all over the country with little effort to maintain records, who the children were transferred to, who the parents of the children were, where the parents were, and where the children ultimately were sent. This is the consequence of this behavior by this government. How can something like this be done in broad daylight in front of the entire country and the world, and no arrests have been made, no accountability has taken place? The entire situation is being treated as if it's a policy dispute rather than the abominable crime that it is. This is not just a policy dispute about legal versus illegal immigration. This is kidnapping over 5,000 children and then having over 500 children remain kidnapped that you don't even know where the kids are. Those are crimes. That's not a policy dispute. Those are crimes. So I ask, where are our voices? If this happened in Buffalo, this happened to people in Buffalo, where would your voice be? Would you just walk around, muffle mouth, and say, oh, we have a policy dispute, with, somebody, above us in Buffalo? Or would you fight? Would you say, this is completely wrong, I'm not going to accept this, and fight? We need to raise our voices. We need to be going to our representatives and saying, this is just unacceptable. And if I don't see you fighting to do something about this, you're not going to get my vote the next time around. We have to have that kind of an attitude. I know we're getting short on time. Maureen Franco, who's the head of the Public Defender's Office that serves part of the Texas-Mexico border, says she considers the children kidnapped by the government. Without any authority to do that, the child was taken by force. She says since the Trump administration declared zero tolerance of illegal border crossings from Mexico and began tearing families apart, dozens of distraught parents are being put before a judge on criminal charges every day, many fleeing violence and poverty in Central America and Mexico. Franco and her team, public defenders, have suddenly found themselves on the front lines of the chaos, confusion, and heartbreak caused by the way the laws are now being enforced. She described the unlawful misdemeanor that the migrants are routinely charged with after a first unauthorized border crossing as a petty offense. This used to be a status crime. It's the Trump administration that says this is a misdemeanor. Prior to the Trump administration, if you crossed the border illegally, that was called a status offense. It was no different than disorderly conduct, right? Trespassing, or something like that, right? So it's a status offense. You get spanked on the wrist, stop doing that, and you go your merry way. The Trump administration decided to have this turned into a misdemeanor, which then makes it a crime, so that once you get convicted of the crime of crossing the border illegally, you can then be deported on the basis of that. So dozens of distraught parents are being put before a judge on criminal charges every day, many fleeing violence and poverty in Central. I talked about that. They're taking children away from their parents for the equivalent of a traffic ticket. The parent-child relationship is a fundamental right protected by the Constitution. Anybody in our country has the protection of the Constitution. I don't know if people understand that. They keep talking about, and the current presidential administration keeps talking about illegal aliens as if somehow the Constitution doesn't apply to them. That's just patently not true. The Constitution of the United States applies to anybody who is physically standing on U.S. soil that belongs to the United States. Whether you're in the contiguous states, whether you're in Alaska, you're in Hawaii, you're in the Virgin Islands, you're in Puerto Rico, wherever you are, if you are on territory that belongs, Papua New Guinea, if you are on territory that belongs to the United States, the Constitution of the United States applies to you, for everybody, right? So John Kelly, until last year was the head of the Department of Homeland Security. This is the same John Kelly that's now the chief of staff for the President of the United States. Up until the summer of 2017, the cases of people crossing the border at illegal points and presenting themselves to the Customs Office were not prosecuted at all until John Kelly gets there. Families were kept together and their cases were processed by immigration authorities. From the summer of 2017 forward, prosecutions began happening with increasing frequency. Then in April of this year, the Trump administration removed the discretion government lawyers had when deciding to prosecute illegal entry cases, directing prosecution in all cases of illegal entry. Many in court are pleading guilty in hopes that they will be reunited with their children more quickly, even though many don't know where their children have been taken by the authorities. Parents just want to get out of jail as soon as possible so that they can be reunited with their children, so they plead guilty. But a criminal record has serious immigration consequences. A guilty plea and sentence can jeopardize a future claim for political asylum in immigration court. Now under the president, his detain and separate policies, even if the parents plead guilty to illegal entry, they have no assurance that they will get their children back. So It's all we can talk about today. I really wanted to talk about the fact that college isn't all free is not free. We'll talk about that next week. So y'all